Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Carolina Geek Podcast. It is your host, John Thomas Hill here, and I may be doing something controversial here, then again, maybe I'm not. I don't believe Star Wars is science fiction, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I believe it's actually more fantasy based in space than anything like Star Trek or anything like that. I believe you could best describe it as a version of Lord of the Rings like story in just in space. Is it as good as Lord of the Rings? I'll leave that up to you. Me personally, no. Although, to be honest with you, I'm not a really huge fan of either one. I've watched the movies. I haven't read the books. I've tried with the Lord of the Rings books. It's just, I don't like it. I'll be that honest with you. The story's probably great. It's just, I think Tolkien goes into way too much detail. Way too much detail about those books. But to get back to Star Wars for a second, I have to admit I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. I don't hate it. I enjoy it. But it's not like I'm jonesing for the next Star Wars movie. And part of the reason is what I said at the beginning. I don't think it's science fiction. I'm not a huge fantasy realm person. It's just never really appealed to me. I like my science fiction to tend to be kind of grounded in some sort of reality that I can kind of go, well, if this goes this way and all of this, I could see it happening. Star Trek is closer to science fiction than Star Wars by a long shot. But even they tend to go way off into the utopian stuff, although Star Trek Picard has kind of reined that in a little bit. And on another podcast, I should say, I'll go into more detail as to why I think it's actually a good thing that Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery kind of knock off the kind of utopian mystique of Star Trek. But here, let's stick with Star Wars for this episode. I'm not going to go into detail about story or analysis or anything like that. Somewhere down the road, we're going to do a watch-along. The reason I never got into it is, like I said before, I think it's more fantasy than science fiction. The original three are great. I think they're equally all three good. The sequels are pretty good, but not fantastic. The finale, I think, tried to rush too many storylines. I really think they should have broken the last movie up into two, like they did with the Hunger Games trilogy. I think they should have done that, broken it up into two different films. And they could have really done a great job with it that way. They made the mistake Game of Thrones made and tried to rush the entire story into one short time, you know. And I'm going to get to Game of Thrones down the road because I got an opinion about that. I got an opinion about a lot of things. Here's the main reason is, it's just that the story just does not lend itself to being realistic in the sense of you don't see humanity being like this anytime soon. The Force is basically basically magic, for lack of a better term. And magic tends to be a fantasy realm. Now, you've got people go, well, science, certain levels of science can be made to look like magic. Well, not really. There's always some kind of there's obviously technology in Star Wars, but it's always kind of thrown together. Like, I've never had a really sound explanation for hyperdrive. It's just there. I think there's probably some Trek fan or Star Wars fan out there that does have an explanation as to how it works and all that. You kind of know what Star Trek's warp drive, you and some of the other, like Babylon 5's even, is a bit too resting on this idea of ancient aliens technology we happen to stumble upon. We find a way to kind of make it work. But that's one of the only criticisms I have. And generally it's sort of like, hey, we found this stuff, well, let's make it work. The whole Galactic Empire thing, it's so big. It's basically, I honestly think they just made a bunch of planets up. There's no real detail in the sense of like Babylon 5 and to a degree Star Trek and other stories. It's not that it's bad at all. It's one of those things that's sort of like, it's not like McDonald's. It's sort of like, how can I describe it, as a good restaurant but not a great restaurant in the culinary sense. It's sort of like a Carrabba's Italian Grill. It's better than Olive Garden, but it's not the thing you can get in New York where it's really, really good and really, really close to what you can get in Italy. Or it's like Chipotle. It's better than Taco Bell, but it's not the stuff you can get in Los Angeles or San Diego. I once described Star Wars as being a simple story elegantly told. And I stick by that, especially for the original trilogy. The problem with the prequels is, honestly, I think they try to do too much and try to make the story, it's just one of those things. The expectations were so high for it, and it just missed the mark. I think it's a situation where they try to appeal to both kids. The whole Jar Jar Binks thing clearly was about promoting a kid-friendly character in that movie. That was smacking of corporate marketing 101. Find something that kids will love, which they didn't. They hated it. It's one of those weird things about that movie, was just that that character really never was believable. It was, to me, it just, why would you keep this person on? Why would you keep this being on your side? C-3PO and R2-D2 are intelligent robots to a degree, and I can understand why people like them. Jar Jar Binks, for the most part.
Sorry, I don't know that, but you have sleep sounds by Sleep Jar enabled. Do you want to open it?
No. Sorry, that's Alexa. But here's the thing. Jar Jar just really set a bad tone for the whole prequels right from the beginning. The first one just was not... The Phantom Menace was not horrible. It wasn't bad. It was enjoyable on its own to a degree, but it just was not the expectation that we all had for it. The second film, in my honest opinion, really brought the whole thing down. I think that whoever directed it, I don't know the person right offhand, I don't really want to look it up right now. The Star Wars fans are probably screaming the name right now. I don't care. I'm not passionate about Star Wars. they must not know how to direct actors, because Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen, along with others, were very wooden in this film. And the last two films, I'll be perfectly frank, I think Natalie Portman flat out mailed it in. She's a great actress, has done some great things, done some really amazing work over the years. But I think the second and third films she saw as a paycheck. Just do the work, get it over with, go home, collect your paycheck, go do on to the next thing. And I'll be honest with you, I think they knew it too, and I think that's the reason Padme died the way she did. Was sort of a F.U. to Natalie Portman. That's why you don't really see her out doing much Star Wars stuff. Because I don't think she really cares for the fact of being involved with it. She may have done a little bit here and there, but she's not embraced the franchise like other former stars. And I think to a degree the reason that is because she didn't understand it. I don't think she really understood just how passionate the fan base is and how good the fan base is. And I think to a degree, and this is part of the reason I think that hardcore science fiction fans really don't like Star Wars. They're okay with it, they just don't like it in the sense of, it's like with Meatloaf. People will like it well enough to eat it, but they're not going to go out of their way for it. Okay, they're not gonna. They may eat it just for the fact, hey, it'll fill me up. You know, I know it won't be bad. I know it won't be great, but it won't be bad. Okay, because it's kind of hard to screw up Meatloaf. Star Wars, and to a degree, Star Trek's the same way. It's so much about marketing and being this franchise that in many ways, creatively, it just does not resonate. Whereas you compare Babylon 5, which has pretty much been, you have 5 years plus a little 13-episode trilogy of a spin-off called Crusade, plus that one attempt they made at Legend of the Rangers, which wasn't really that great, to be honest with you. Which is probably the reason why I've never really been fond of any kind of reboot. I think Star Wars' biggest problem is that Disney, and even before that, Fox, saw it as a simple way to make a lot of money off of these fans. The books, I've never read a Star Wars book. Don't really plan on doing it because it's like Star Trek books. I read a few Star Trek books here and there over the years. Never really. There are very few that I actually would have considered to be pretty good. Some were just like romance novels. They're manufactured, churning them out. They weren't that. You know, some were. I mean, there are probably some Star Wars books that are really good. I've heard stuff about the Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic, and all of that. But to me, I think the problem is, and I'm not trying to be hipster or anything like that, but it just doesn't appeal to me. It just doesn't. And a lot of it is just the fact that it just does not come off as being, you know, believable. It's a great story, and the sequels saved the franchise, although they have plenty of issues themselves. I mean, you look at The Force Within. In many ways, it was New Hope 2.0. Not necessarily in a bad way, because it reintroduced you to the franchise. It kind of did like Battlestar Galactica. All this has happened before. All this will happen again. And then Last of the Jedi. Pretty much the middle film changed things. shifted things differently, the fans didn't like that. And here's part of the reason I think Star Wars doesn't appeal to me. The fandom. Occasionally I'll read about stuff involving Star Wars, and the fans of Star Wars are almost as toxic as New York sports fans. They're never happy. They always want something to complain about. And when they do get something good, they're never satisfied. Or they're kind of like, well, it's nice, Hey, the Yankees won another World Series. Or, hey, the Giants won another Super Bowl. Or, hey, the Islanders might actually win the Stanley Cup this year. They don't know how to deal with happiness. But with the Mets and the Knicks, they thrive on having something to complain about. Star Wars fans are just as bad. Star Trek fans to a degree, and I would dare say probably are just as bad. I've heard so much bad stuff about the animated series Lower Decks. I've heard about Star Trek fans complain about Picard. I've heard Star Trek fans complain about Discovery. You get new stuff, and you complain about it. You want to tear it down because it's not as good as you thought the original was. Let me be perfectly frank here. Not too long ago, I rewatched the original Star Wars. And to be perfectly honest, it's still enjoyable, but it's dated. It could be better. It could frankly be a lot better to really grasp the story. I can see the appeal of it. I just never fell in love with it like the fans do. And the problem when you fall in love with something is that sometimes you idolize it so much that any time you add on to it and try to make it better, try to add something new to it, you're going to have that segment of fandom that hates it. Like with when Star Trek came out with the new film in 2009, traditional fans hated it. They never gave it a chance. They never understood this was an attempt to try and reboot things to kind of get casual fans interested and maybe lead to where you want the films to go. But to be perfectly honest, and I'm going to try to address this somewhere down the road, is Star Trek really has never done well in movies. Not sustainably. They'll have one here and there. I think Wrath of Khan's great. I think Undiscovered Country's great. I think First Contact's great. Every other Star Trek film besides that is either average or below average. I personally think that when you get right down to it, Star Wars will probably eventually be rebooted. It will annoy the fans. It will drive them crazy. It will absolutely have the old school fans wanting to burn down Disney. But I see it coming. Whether it's an animated version of it from 1 to 9 to kind of smooth out the storyline, or if it's a live action reboot. Personally, if you had the right director and the directors and producers and overall, in TV they call it a showrunner. In movies I don't know what they call it, but it was sort of like a showrunner. Where if you did all 9 in the space of 9 years, like Lord of the Rings did, they did all 3 films in 3 years. There was a continuity to the story. It could work. In the right director or director's hands, I don't think Peter Jackson was brilliant with 3 films. I don't think he can do 9 in a row. But if you have directors with a shared vision of where the films should go, and there's continuity there, I think you could make it work, a reboot. Now, it's not going to happen anytime soon because I'm a realist. I think Disney wants new stuff in the Star Wars universe. I don't think that's going to fly. I think the only way you can do it is 5-10 years down the road, reboot the whole franchise. Don't change the story dramatically. Make a little adjustment here and there to kind of make it make more sense. But retell the story. I think, and it's one of those things that I think Star Wars really misses the boot, misses things, because it's a movie franchise that the universe has gotten so big, and its own internal universe has gotten so big in it that it's almost, too big. But to get back to the point of this podcast, to call Star Wars science fiction is like calling pro wrestling actual sports. Yeah, some of the elements it's physical. You have to be in shape to do professional wrestling, but it's entertainment. Okay? It ain't the same thing. Star Wars is in space. There is technology there. There is some physics stuff involved. But it ain't science fiction. There will be plenty of you who will disagree with me. Plenty of you who will be hot, bothered, and frothing at the mouth to retort my viewpoint. I am more than happy to listen to it. But understand this, that being called fantasy is not a bad thing. The Star Wars universe, at its core, is a great story. It's a great story, great mythology. And I think when you look at how great that universe is, it's gonna be lasting a heck of a long time. Maybe longer than Star Trek. Now, in the coming weeks, I'm going to talk about Star Trek. And we'll talk about how I think the franchise has long since lost its way. It's tried to come back. But it's not really where it needs to be. And I'm going to talk about Babylon 5, where that could have been the third big star science fiction, quote-unquote science fiction franchise. But because of internal politics at Warner Brothers, it got shafted. I may have to do some research about that. I'll talk about Firefly, why that show continues to live on and have the cult following it does, because it simply was 13 great episodes and one very good movie that will probably resonate for decades, for the simple reason that they didn't get a chance to have so many of them, and why Battlestar Galactica was every bit as good as the original Firefly for the first season, but they got renewed, and slowly but surely, over time, that franchise, and my personal opinion is, I think any TV show should be over and done with in 5 years. They should follow the Babylon 5 formula. 5 years, beginning, middle, and end, gone. Commit to it. If you want to do 4 years or 3 years, great. If you want to Stretch it out maybe 6 or 7, okay, but don't try and do year after year after year. The only show I can think of that kept consistent quality for over a decade is Supernatural. Walking Dead fell off the bandwagon. ER towards the end, nowhere near as good as the original, as the beginning of it. A lot of shows. Some people will say Gunsmoke, but that was back at a time where it wasn't that hard to please the fans. Plus, I'm not really much for westerns, to be honest with you. I've watched Gunsmoke episodes here and there back when I was a kid. Not really a big fan. If you like it, that's fine. I understand it, but not my thing. But Star Wars, to wrap it up, Star Wars is not science fiction in my opinion. It's fantasy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not really a bad thing at all, frankly, because it's still a great story. It's just not science fiction. That's not being snobbish or anything like that. It's just acknowledging the fact that it's basically a fantasy story told in space. You can disagree with it all you want to. That's fine. I'm more than happy for you to talk about it in the comments. But understand this. And this is the reason I think that I'm not a big Star Wars fan. It's kind of like the big criticism sports fans have is people that are bandwagon fans. I know a lot of folks who are Dallas Cowboy fans, who are also Los Angeles Laker fans and New York Yankee fans. Why? Because the teams were successful and popular. But they couldn't tell you much about the history of those teams. Or why they even followed them. Some may like the Lakers more than they do the Cowboys or the Yankees. I need to do that for the Rutherford Sports Network. Why some teams have fans and yet they don't really have the passionate fan base. Except the Steelers do have a very passionate fan base. But why some teams that are popular have passionate fan bases and others that are popular and they don't really have passionate fan bases? I need to do that one of these days. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this. I know it went longer than expected. I like to go and talk about these things. But we'll talk about Star Trek in the next podcast, about why I think the franchise has lost its way. It's kind of getting it back to a degree. Why I think Picard and Discovery are doing some good work to make it fresh, to make it to where it's not this beautiful utopian thing that it's still great. It's just sort of like, it's relatable. You know, it's like, yeah, it's a great place to live, but there's this place down the road that's a greasy diner that if you eat the cheeseburger there, yeah, it'll taste great, but 2 hours later you're going to be feeling it and going to the bathroom and having a bad time. Okay? Or, you know, there's the rough section where if you ain't down, you might have a bad time. You know, or it's like dirt under the fingernails, you know. It's like it's a little bit of grit and all that. Isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just my opinion. I'm going to talk about that another time. But Star Wars, I know a lot of people love Star Wars, are passionate about Star Wars, love the message of the Jedi and all that. To me, it's basically sci-fi Lord of the Rings. And that's not a bad thing. That's it. It's enjoyable. It's definitely watchable. It has its flaws. The original trilogy didn't age as well as you'd hoped it would, in my view. Some people vehemently disagree with that. That's fine. It's just understand this. Not everybody's going to find Star Wars great. Even those that find it great aren't going to embrace it like you do. So simple. Okay, well, I'm going to get off here and go do another podcast probably. Hope you enjoy your day. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.